This episode contains explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. In 2014, we were dropped into a world with its own understanding of time.
Someone once told me time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done or will do, we're gonna do over and over and over again.
In the first season of True Detective, we were introduced to a whole other side of Louisiana. Grisly, desolate, and mesmerizing.
There's something about New Orleans that brings you back. There's something in the land. It has this feeling. It's true. There's some spiritual feeling here.
There's a dampness in the air, mosquitoes buzzing in your ears. A camera moves you through buildings decayed by humidity, worn down by time and generations of use.
This place is like somebody's memory of a town, and the memory's fading.
And even though it showed us places we might not have seen before, hoarder houses, burnt down churches, a maze of spiraling tunnels, somehow the world always felt authentic.
Because it's real. The audience can whiff when something is, phony.
The first season of True Detective made us feel like we were really there. And that's thanks to these two.
I'm Alex DiGerlando, the production designer.
And I'm Cynthia Slater, the set decorator for True Detective Season 1.
I'm SuChin Pak, and this is On Set With from HGTV and Max. Each episode, we take you behind the scenes of the most iconic on-screen worlds with the people who made them real. So let's go on set with Season 1 of True Detective, with the designers who brought it to life. When True Detective first came on the scene, it changed everything. But when you're designing a world this visceral from scratch, where do you start?
It's clearly a brilliant script. Everybody in the world, it's one of the first things everyone talks about with this show. The scripts were very descriptive and evocative. And having spent a lot of time in that part of the world, I could just see everything that Nick was describing on the page. A lot of times, when I'm researching for a project, I go down a rabbit hole and I'm just pulling images that, I don't necessarily know why I'm pulling. There's the first pass where you're pulling, specific images because you're I have to do a police headquarters. Let me find images of police quarters. That's kind of the base kind of research. But then there's the next layer of research where you're just pulling images that speak to you, that kind of have vibe or mood or tone. A lot of what we do is tone, right? Setting the tone, figuring out what that tone should be.
I don't like this place. Nothing grows in the right direction.
Honestly, it was through one of Alex's images. There's an image that popped out, and it was an overhead shot of a grill, like a hibachi.
Yes.
But it was so gritty and so worn. It'd been through so much. And I feel like there was some green, a little bit of red. I can't remember whether there were tools or something next to it. But
there's a knife. I think there was a knife, or a tool or something on it.
But also in my head, was there a squirrel's tail? Or did I think what happened is I ended up adding to that image, and I did that. And I remember I took that and printed it out and put it on the cover of, I'm still old school. I write everything down. I draw everything out. I don't really use a computer a lot. And I remember I put it on the cover of my little lookbook. And I was like, this is the show. And that's all I needed was that picture and a script and Alex and the rest of the team.
You never know what the thing's gonna be, do you? A little detail somewhere way down the line makes you say, breaks the case.
I remember when I called you about the job, because we had worked together in Shreveport on this movie, The East. And when I read the script, I was like, wait a minute, it's set in New Orleans and it's kind of gritty. I know the person for this job.
I'm your gal. I'm your gal for grit.
And I remember hearing the excitement in your voice. You're you saw it before you even read a word, I think.
Yeah. I was like, that's it. I'm in it. The script, it's in Louisiana. It's just, everything made sense.
How long have you lived in Louisiana, Cindy?
I lived there a total of 10 years at that point in time. I'd only been there about 5 years, I think. But being there, and I think there's something about New Orleans that brings you back. There's something in the land. It has this feeling. It's true. There's some spiritual feeling here.
Authenticity was the name of the game for designing True Detective. It was a goal set from the very beginning by director Cary Joji Fukunaga and creator-showrunner Nick Pizzolatto. Despite the heightened elements of the show, they wanted the environment to feel grounded.
They wanted this to feel like any location you're in, you could feel like you could be driving down a by road and you could stumble into this place and you would believe that it actually existed.
And to be able to film where it is scripted and not have to make everything up.
That's true. That was very important to me.
That's very important.
It's a real treat to be able to do it in the place where it's set because I think it just adds so much more to the authenticity and it inspires you. You find things that you can incorporate into the sets. You're kind of inhabiting a living research library, so to speak.
That Ledoux family, they still live around here?
Oh, maybe a cousin or two. Been shrinking every year. Hurricane Andrew wiped most of the folks out around here.
One of the things that's amazing about Louisiana is that there are just incredible textures. I think part of that has to do with the climate. I think that part of it has to do with the socioeconomic tapestry that exists there. It's the culture, it's the spirit of it. It's really a very, very unique place, and it's just so rich in so many ways.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, there wasn't one thing that I used that wasn't like the earth or air or something hadn't like taken it somewhere, taken it on its journey. I didn't believe in having anything painted or aged. I didn't want to have any of that. So I'd be driving down the road, and if somebody had like a cool chair that I'd never seen before and it was just aged properly, I'd go knock on the door and ask if I could buy it. I bought a dog house in somebody's front yard in St. Francisville. I mean, if I saw something, a broom, and it was just used properly, I was buying it. I was buying that sponge. Somebody's using a pen. I'm like, oh my God, that's the perfect pen. Can I have that pen? Like I did that everywhere. I mean, people thought I was insane.
You can't make this stuff up, right? So it's like, I remember we were scouting some like on a plantation, a sharecropper's home, and they used an old plastic fork through the lock latch to keep the door from swinging open and closed. And I remember like taking a picture of that and saying like, Cindy, we got to do that somewhere. I don't know if we did in the end, but like things like that. Like we had seen somewhere, I forget where we were, but someone had hung all these like Ziploc bags full of water to help like deter mosquitoes.
Them flies are getting thick. Somebody ought to give you a good hosing.
So that's where that kind of, we'd always be taking pictures of things that we would pass in our travels and incorporating those into the sets because it's real.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like the audience can whiff when something is, phony.
As production designer and set decorator, Alex and Cynthia determine the visual look of a show and select all the furniture and objects you see on screen. But to hear them talk about it, it sounds like an intuitive, almost spiritual process.
I think what's sort of interesting about what production design and set decoration does that's sort of different than like, let's say, architecture and interior decoration is that like when you're designing a house, you're designing for the future, right? This is like a receptacle for a possible future. And there's an element of that in design for movies or TV shows, but it's a very, you're designing for a very specific future. You know exactly what's going to happen in that space. So you're designing toward the story. But then also, you're designing the history of that space.
Ask you something. You're Christian, yeah?
No.
What do you got the cross for in your apartment?
It's a form of meditation.
How's that?
I contemplate the moment in the garden. The idea of allowing your own crucifixion.
So, like, Cindy will bring in, all sorts of tchotchkes that have, like, meaning to a character that fleshes out where that character was before the action of the story is taking place. We might choose a wallpaper thinking this was a wallpaper that was chosen by this character's mother, and now it's faded, and that just kind of grounds you in, like, what period of time this family moved into this house. There's a lot of thought going into like every little choice that when all of those things come together, it does a lot of the storytelling, but subconsciously. The audience knows a lot about the character before the actor even walks onto the set.
As fans of the show know, that first season of True Detective was all about this partnership between detectives Marty Hart, played by Woody Harrelson, and Rust Cole, played by Matthew McConaughey. But partnership is kind of a funny word here, because in so many ways, these characters could not be more different.
I get a bad taste in my mouth out here. Aluminum, ash. Like you can smell the psychosphere.
I got an idea. Let's make the car a place of silent reflection from now on. Okay?
At the beginning of their design process, Alex and Cynthia brought that deep subconscious storytelling they were just talking about to the differences between Marty and Rust.
Well, Marty was a family man, and his wife is always home alone with the kids. And so it felt homey, and the kitchen felt like she was, she's always somewhere in the house, and it was their house.
Well, Rust, it is so nice to finally meet you. Sorry it took so long.
Well, I tried to tell her you aren't big on socializing.
I said that your life's in this man's hands, right? Of course you should meet the family.
Look, as the story goes on, you learn a lot of a lot about Marty's deficiencies, but we wanted to show the difference between like a thriving family versus the coldness of a destroyed family. Because before we meet Rust, we learn later that like his family was destroyed by this tragedy that befell on them.
Children?
One. She passed. Marriage didn't last long after that.
Rust's apartment is very extreme. It's it's beyond minimalist. It's only function. Like, it's not a home. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. Like, the Hart house is a home and has all the trappings of what makes a home, all the layers of history that we were just talking about. And then, Rust is totally devoid of that.
I'd offer you a seat, but,
Don't mention it, I can't stay.
Another way designers like Alex and Cynthia can achieve that kind of realism is instead of building a full set from scratch, building onto an existing location. But how do you source locations that are so specific? Like, for example, a serial killer's off-grid hoarder house.
I should say that we had an amazing locations department, and it's a very big part of our job, like finding those locations. So Batu and Win and Jimmy, they brought us like amazing things. And they were really great about like when I would kind of describe what I was looking for, they would push past the kind of obvious places.
The Childress house, it hadn't been opened for, 25 years?
Yeah.
It had crabs living in it.
What?
The whole bottom floor was filled with crabs because the bayou was across the street.
Oh, yes.
So when we went to go dress it, we had to get rid of crabs, you name it. It was living in that house.
It was a family house, if I remember correctly. And the parents had died, and there were maybe like 4 children, and they all like inherited the house, but no one really wanted to deal with it. So it kind of just sat there languishing. It actually was pretty empty, right, Cindy? Like,
it was completely empty except for like the creatures.
Marty. This is the place.
Once they got those creatures out, they had a blank slate to work with, and it was their job to transform this empty house into a family home filled with generations worth of objects telling the Childress family's story. To start, Alex drew from an early source of subconscious inspiration.
I had found this picture of like all these old, like rotted out, decrepit dolls. It was a black and white image, just packed, edge to edge frame was packed with these old Victorian dolls. Some were missing eyes, some had tattered dresses, some were missing limbs. And that sort of moved me, and Carrie and Nick loved that. And then everyone like rallied around that image. So we showed that to Cindy, and Cindy like locked that mission into her cranium and for 8 months just accumulated all of these things.
Organized hoarding.
Yeah.
Finding multiples of so many things. And also, from the 70s and the 80s. Basically 7 months of collecting.
My family's been here a long, long time.
I think the Childress home is probably kind of a masterclass in set decorating because everything you see in there, the video cassettes, the dolls, the clawfoot tub, everything Cindy brought in. Every single thing that Cindy saved for that house was very considered. It wasn't just like quantity. Each individual thing told a piece of the tapestry that was the Childress family and what led these characters to be the way that they were.
Who do you live here with?
I think you should go now.
Where is he?
All around us. Before you were born. And after you die.
As you walk through that place and you're following Marty through the rooms in that house, it's musical. There are movements to that progression that Cindy's she's playing that instrument. You turn this corner up the stairs, and then, if I'm remembering correctly, all the dolls were like at the top of the stairs, right? They're not like in a room.
No.
What a weird choice, right? That's like the last thing that those guys, when they're climbing the stairs, are going to expect to be confronted with. And that's like way more jarring and upsetting than any number of other things.
He's gonna come for you. He's worse than anybody.
Also, one of my favorite things that Cindy did is that wall of VHS cassettes.
Oh,
I think we had to like build something to hold those together so that they wouldn't topple over because it was like a higher stack than was really physically possible. I think, someone who is looking to learn the art of set decoration could really do no better than to look at that set in particular.
They built the perfect interior for the Childress house. Next, they had to visually make that estate look like it was connected to the tunnels of Carcosa, which had been shot elsewhere.
We did a lot of greens work to create a transition from that property to this pre-Civil War fort that was on the complete other side of New Orleans. They ran through this tunnel of greens into the actual tunnels of this historic landmark, and that's where we added all of the driftwood and structures that led to what came to be known as Carcosa, although I don't remember anyone ever referring to it as Carcosa while we were making it.
Come on inside, little breeze. This is Carcosa.
In the final episode of the season, we watch as Rust winds his way through Carcosa, a maze of tunnels filled with driftwood spirals. When he reaches the end, he finds himself face to face with the Yellow King, a menacing figure constructed of branches and bones, draped in tattered yellow fabric, with 3 human skulls for a head, topped with a crown of antlers. When Alex saw that called for in the script, he knew they needed an excellent artist. Cynthia had a hunch for the perfect candidate, but it just so happened to be her friend and ex-fiancé, Joshua Walsh.
We had made lots of art together, and we just did little pieces together. And he had made a stone bird, and he's a hunter, a bow hunter, and he uses every part of the deer. So he had taken sinew and made like this little bird, and it had been on my desk. And I kept looking at it, and I knew he was like a naturalist. He was perfect. He's an artist. He's a naturalist. He uses everything from the earth. And I remember somebody saying, you need to show that to Alex. So because I contemplated showing it, even though
Cindy
I knew
very generously.
I knew he was going to be perfect. But in my head, I was like, I don't know. And that's how it all started. They called Josh, and he came, and he was perfect.
He became a real integral collaborator. And
yes,
his art manifests in many ways. There's the the crown that Dora wears that's made of the antlers. There's I think they're called bird traps in the show, but the fans later on called them devil's nests. There's the murals that show up in the burnt-out church and the abandoned school and on the Childress property. And so I just felt like they had to be cohesive. Otherwise, it would feel, again, fake and not authentic. So we basically like set up a studio in our de facto soundstage kind of in a corner of the set dressing shop. And he would like go out into the woods or like the fields and come back with like deer antlers and feathers and
He'd go down to the river and just get all the driftwood, and he'd spend days just everything on the river.
Yeah, all that driftwood.
All of it.
Yeah, he collected all of that.
Yeah.
You know, probably illegally now that I think about it. Like what we really haven't talked about is maybe the most iconic set in the show, but it's sort of like a stealth set, which is that conference room within the CID that the two of them are being interviewed in 2012.
That's what you all want to hear about, right? Dora Lang, kids in the woods.
Yeah, sure. But talk about Cole. We heard some stories.
Kind of a strange guy, huh?
Strange. Yeah.
In the original script, they're being interrogated in an interrogation room. And early on, talking through the scenes with Carrie, we were like, it seems weird that you're bringing these like former members of your department in and putting them in the interrogation room. That would be like kind of a hostile act. And if you're trying to like gently kind of coerce some information out of them without letting on what you're asking, like that would put them on the defense.
Listen, boys, I'm gonna have to call a time out, make a beer run.
Well, why don't you hold off on that for a while?
What would you do to keep them disarmed?
All right, well, why don't you get it then?
We really don't want to do that.
Well, you bring them into the conference room.
Well, is this supposed to be admissible? Huh? And you wanna pick my brain, you work a room, you buy a man a cheeseburger and a Coke, don't you?
You're questioning them as colleagues, not as suspects.
I'll take a sixer of old Milwaukee or Lone Star, nothing snooty.
So we did kind of an interesting thing because there's 3 different timelines throughout this story. There's 95, 2002, and 2012. The CID had to evolve through the different eras, and so you would see the differences. So, like, you know, presuming that the department was built out in, like, I don't know, the late 70s or early 80s, in 95, it still would have been, you know, in pretty good condition. It wouldn't have been that shabby. The conference room was still sort of used as for that purpose. But then by 2012, it's become more of a storage room, like an auxiliary space, like, you know, as like computers kind of. And in 95, there's no computers on any of the desks. And by 2012, the department is fully computerized and you see more cables everywhere. And we just thought that that would be a cool way of illustrating the passage of time. And another fun way that Carrie and Adam Markapah, the DP, shot it was that putting Rust against that wall of clutter and Marty against the window wall of the conference room. So at the beginning of the show, you're not even aware that they're both being interrogated in the same room. It's only like an episode or 2 in that the perspective of the camera changes and you realize like, oh, they've both been brought into this place.
His record, his reports, his stories, they don't add up.
So talk to him about it already. Stop pissing in my ear.
We did.
Oh, you did?
What?
Well, if you two talked to Russ, you weren't getting a read on him. He was getting a read on you.
The early years of the CID are especially vivid. It almost feels like you can smell the cigarette smoke in the room, which of course was no accident.
Movie studios and networks don't really want characters smoking. And Carrie was very adamant that, like, if you're telling a story about people in this part of the country in 1995, there is definitely smoking going on. And it's going to be going on inside. So the columns that are in the middle of the CID, there's these I-beam columns. We painted them with a sort of like a orangish dado. They're kind of like white on the top and orange at the bottom. And that was sort of like my like subliminal, they're giant cigarettes. And then when you're back in that set later, they've been painted like an institutional blue or gray, and they've got a lot of wires on them.
Could you
All right, yeah.
hold off on
Can't do that here no more.
Oh, you assholes. You want to hear this or not?
Ideally, you would shoot all of that stuff in order so that the set could evolve as you shoot it and you're not going back and forth. But of course, it never works out that way for casting reasons and any number of reasons. So Cindy's lead man, Marcus, came up with this ingenious system of attaching all of the computer cables that are mounted on those columns with magnets. So we could pull those down quickly and not have to string them up every time.
We had to keep going back and forth in time.
It's like in this universe, we process time linearly forward. But outside of our space-time, from what would be a fourth dimensional perspective, time wouldn't exist.
Alex and Cynthia worked on many incredibly complex sets for season 1 of True Detective, but visually, one stands out above the rest, and that's the burnt-out church.
I kind of knew early on, it was so specific that we were going to have to make that, because what are the chances we're going to find a burnt-out church in the middle of nowhere? And it being dilapidated was important. To find that clue, it couldn't be a place that people would occupy. We ended up scouting on the backside of the Bonnecarre Spillway, which was a very key location that I had shot on in Beasts of the Southern Wild, which is, if you're familiar with that movie, it's the levee that they blow up with the alligator garfish. But the backside of it, when the water's not allowed through, it's a floodplain, but it's just flat. And we realized that in the distance, we could see these petrochemical plants. And there was a little bit of a naturally occurring pond there. And we were like, this would be a cool place to put the church because you get that reflection on the water. And if we shot it on a telephoto lens, it would really compress the space and you would see all the smokestacks, which then ended up influencing the opening credit sequence to the show, So we decided we wanted to build a church there. And we went to the producers and said, this is where we're going to do it. And they looked at us like we were crazy. They're like, there's no roads there. How are you going to build a church in the middle of this plain where you can't get to with trucks? They're like, oh, yeah, minor detail. Well, we'll make a road. And that's what we ended up doing. And it took a little convincing. At first, the producer was like, you're crazy. I want to put the dollars on the screen. I don't want to spend money building a road that is never going to be filmed so that you can build this location. And I was like, I'm telling you, the road itself won't be on the screen, but what will be on the screen is only accessible by this road that doesn't exist, and it will be worth it. And to his credit, he heard us and allowed us to go for it. And we laid I don't know how much gravel to make a drivable road. And we had construction guys out there for, weeks building this church, scenicking it so that it looked like, the paint was bleached out and peeling off.
No numbers on this place. Fire must have happened a long time ago.
I was very adamant that for the burnt parts, we actually had to burn the timbers because otherwise that would look fake because wood burns in a very specific way with very specific texture that can't be faked. Cindy, you searched high and low for those pews,
The pews, which we ended up burning, 2 or 3 truckloads from a church that had gone under. We put a safe place outside, and I think we had special effects and my guys working on burning all the pews. And everything else I think that I put in there.
Marty and Rust find the burnt-out church while tracking the movements of Dora Lang, the victim they discover at the beginning of the series. That scorched building is one of the most iconic and memorable images in the show, and hearing that the design team literally built it from nothing is hugely impressive. But in other cases, according to Alex, sometimes the job is knowing when to just leave a set alone.
Dora Lang's mother's house.
Oh, the hoarder.
She's always been in some kind of trouble. I thought things were getting better.
Mrs. Kelly.
Ow. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Hail Mary, full of grace.
Mrs. Kelly.
I get these headaches. It's like storms. I worked in dry cleaning for 20 years. And chemicals.
Yeah, we didn't really do anything for that house. we found that house. I mean, we did some stuff. We added some of the like scripted things.
We cleaned up a little bit.
But I like specifically asked them not to clean too much to the chagrin of the crew. I think we kind of got in a little bit of trouble because like there was maybe it didn't cross my desk quite to the level that it did yours. But when we saw that place, we're like, this is it. Sometimes the job is you just got to know when not to mess, right?
True. I think I probably put 4 scripted pieces in that, and that was it.
Some religious stuff.
It was the religious, yeah.
Like a TV.
The TV.
And like maybe the chair that she sat in.
Yes.
At the core of True Detective, there is, of course, a mystery to be solved. And over the course of their investigation, Marty and Rust end up in secretive places most of us never see, like the Ledoux brothers' meth lab compound, or the bunny ranch where Dora Lane worked, or the dive bar hangout of a white nationalist biker gang, which begs the question, how do you go about designing places that you're not even supposed to know exist?
There's a part of it where it's acting, where you're kind of like going into yourself and finding the things in your experience that might not literally be the thing that you're creating, but kind of speak to the thing that you're creating or that you can at least build off of. You know, some of it has to do with what's in your imagination, but that can be a slippery slope because your imagination is often influenced by other movies and books and TV shows, and you don't want to do something that's kind of derivative that people have seen before or a trope. And in the case of the biker bar...
It was at a truck stop, right?
A convenience store, a truck stop convenience store. I don't even know if that bar was open to the public or if it was just like where the guy who owned the truck stop like lived and it was just kind of, or his like friends
it
like
wasn't
hang out.
a real bar. Like it wasn't open to the public.
Yeah, it had a bar in it. So I think it's like where he and his friends like hung out. There was a canal behind it and they would launch their boat and go fishing from there, if I remember. I'm pretty sure we put up the walls, right? Like the wall that kind of enclosed that kind of back area where all the shenanigans are going on.
What you got there?
This is something just for you.
Something just for me?
Uh-huh.
What'd you cut it with?
You see. You dig it.
If I remember correctly, we also had a biker consultant who had formerly been in a motorcycle club but had since reformed. And I think there's a scene, there's a bit in that back area where you see bikers like running their bikes in circles. That was something that the biker that we consulted with told us about.
And when he would talk to us about like what the sets would look like, you know, I go straight to the internet and I'm typing in very strange things that I would never type in. And you can go into some really deep holes.
It is tricky though, because like sometimes some of these places are like not photographed. Like you can't bring a camera into these places.
Yeah.
So sometimes you're reading written accounts of these places. Sometimes you're hearing stuff from the consultants, or you're finding an image on the internet that kind of unlocks a key to the idea, even though it's not exactly the thing.
At the end of the day, building the world of a show depends entirely on long hours, close collaboration, and having a vision. And according to Cynthia, no one comes to set with a better thought-out vision than Alex and his research photos.
When I came into that office, every hallway, every room, every nook and cranny from floor to ceiling was research photos. I mean, you felt the world when you walked in. Alex really, he's a thinker. He's probably, I think, he is one of the best production designers I've ever worked with. He's a visionary.
Thank you, Cindy.
It's true.
And I feel the same way about Cindy. I mean, we kind of danced around it before, but there's a part of the job, specifically the set decorating job, that requires sort of like multiple personalities where you're inhabiting the mental space of a lot of different characters and you're thinking of like every single thing. Like the dental floss in the junk drawer in the kitchen. The set decorator has to think of that and put that there. And a really good set decorator thinks about all those things on a multidimensional level, not just like, oh, I'm doing a bathroom, this is what goes in a bathroom. What Cindy thinks about is like, this is where people live, this is how people live. Life is messy and weird. The high percentage of the things in the show, although they feel like you walked in untouched, were created completely from scratch. And I don't think any single one of them had a false note, even a little bit. That really is Cindy's brilliance.
Thank you, Alex.
That brilliance and vision from Alex and Cynthia and the rest of the True Detective team is why I would argue that this is one of the best seasons of television ever. And it's not just a story that's exceptional, it's a show that's truly beautiful to watch.
Carrie, the director, and Adam, the DP, to their credit, like, it's probably one of the most cinematic TV shows. Before True Detective, there was a real stigma between what is TV and what is a movie. You know, there were great shows before True Detective, like The Sopranos, one of the greatest shows of all time. But that was a lot about talking and dialogue and character. All of that is in True Detective, but True Detective is also about scope and cinema and composition and texture. Every single department on this show all rose to the occasion and like put their all into it. You know, when you look back at your work, especially if a lot of time has passed and you've grown in your ability or your philosophy or your style, it's easy to look back at the work and see what you would have done differently or see the seams. I don't see any of the seams when I watch True Detective. I'm actually able to watch it as a uninvolved spectator, to the point that I get so wrapped up in the story that I don't even, sometimes, like, I forget what we did, you know? It's like, and then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, we made that. I'm very proud of that. I mean, it's very hard to do that for yourself.
Agreed. I'm proud of the whole show. I'm proud of everything we did on the show. I think it looks amazing. I mean, even at that time, I don't think a lot of television shows, what did we have? We had 480 sets, 500 sets. Like, that was unheard of then. we get them now all the time. But
sorry.
If you want to re-experience this cinematic, immersive story and see Alex and Cynthia's incredible work, check out the first season of True Detective, only on Max. To learn even more about the designers from this episode and others, check out hgtv.com/onsetwithpod. If you'd like to watch On Set With, you can find us on Max or HGTV Home on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and tell a friend. On Set With from HGTV and Max at Warner Brothers Discovery is produced by Spoke Media. Next time, we're on set with 2 of the collaborators who took us inside the life of a North Jersey mob boss, including an iconic pork store, a strip club, and even a psychiatrist's office.
Whatever happened to Gary Cooper, the strong, silent type?
On Set With The Sopranos, coming next. I'm SuChin Pak. Thanks for listening.